Now is the month of May, when merry lads are playing. Fa-la-la-la-la-la-la, fa-la-la-la-la-la-la.
It was an enjoyable time with Killer as headmaster, a friendly gentleman who was fair.
The mobile classrooms weren't here. It was just the tower block, caretaker's cottage, and the cookery room, needlework room, art room, sort of behind the tower block.
I think we've got to move with the times, and I'm sure that the facilities up there are going to be absolutely superb. And after all, our priorities in life really are looking after our youngsters and make sure they get the education that they need.
Good morning, this is Wootton Bassett School. How can I help?
Wootton Bassett School near Swindon in North Wiltshire is said to be one of the biggest comprehensives in the county. Since it opened in May 1958 as a secondary modern, it's undergone many changes. 4 headmasters have graced its corridors so far since then. Its intake of pupils has grown too in that time. And they include me, Jerry Hughes, who first entered its front portals in September 1967 as an irksome first year. In 2002, however, it's undergone its most radical of changes and moved to a brand new building next to the old one, which sadly is to be demolished. But an old boy like me can't let that happen without helping to preserve many of its memories before it vanishes completely. So, I make no apology for this look back at life in Wootton Bassett School being something of a personal indulgence. Memories, you might say, of the old school yard.
Don't you remember the days of the old school yard? When we had
I remember going up the drive the first day that I'd ever been to Wootton Bassett. It was a beautiful summer's day.
Frank Killer King, headmaster from 1958 to 1967.
And I think there were 3 other headmasters on the short list, and one other man, and myself. And I thought, I'm just here as a make-weight. However, I remember what a lovely building I thought it was, although the builders were still crawling around the place. And I was most impressed, of course, by the open spaces around the place. I'd taught at several schools before this, where I was surrounded by factories, narrow streets, noise, pollution, and this place at Wootton Bassett seemed like heaven to me, with all this open space and sunshine. And because I was always keen on sport, I thought, what a wonderful opportunity for a sports field this affords.
Oh, how that bell used to haunt me. Various times throughout the day it would ring down the school's corridors and through the tower block in the centre, indicating the time to move to some other lesson in another part of the building, or that it was time for lunch. More importantly, time to go home, as they used to sing at the end of Andy Pandy. For those of us like yours truly, who attended Wootton Bassett School from the surrounding places, in my case Lynham, the bell would indicate that you must be queued in your bus line soon afterwards or find yourself walking home. For Rhymes of Swindon, Athelston of Malmesbury and Cooks of Lynham had other bus jobs to go on to after they'd seen you safely home. You see, after all these years, that school bell still brings back all the memories to me. The noise in the corridors, the footsteps on the tower stairs, and the banging doors echoing on each of its 3 floors. Frank King had great enthusiasm for the place even before he was offered the job. But the new school, with its distinctive sandy-coloured brickwork and flat-top tower block, also brought with it a few early headaches.
This was January '58, and we had quite a number of teething problems. First of all, within the few weeks or less, the snow came. It was January. The weather was awful. and the heating packed up. Brand new school, no heating. So I arrived one morning with no heat on and had the job of sending them all home, much to the disgust of some of the parents, I suppose, who'd gone to work. But I said, we can't do anything about this. You can't have children in school with no heating. So they went off. I think we had this trouble for several weeks until it was eventually put right. And then lo and behold, the snow all melted and we had a lot of rain, and the place flooded where the heating apparatus was down in the cellar. We were getting water coming through, and it was only due to the efforts of my two splendid caretakers that they managed to keep bailing it out. How they did it during the night, I don't know, but anyway, we kept going and the heating kept going, and eventually the drainage system was put right. But I remember that was in our first term we had these teething troubles.
Ken Gore was head of My House Group between 1967 and 72. He was one of Frank King's first members of staff and also well remembers those early days.
I came to Wootton Bassett in 57, and the school was due to open in the summer, but owing to various delays with the building, it didn't open until I think it was the following Easter. So I did my first few months in the what was then the all-age Church of England school under Jack Goodall.
Oh, so then that was just a transitional period.
And then we moved over here, and Mr. King took over as head, and we moved in. I remember we had all the chairs had arrived for the tower block, and Sam Mitchell, the caretaker, supervised us, the staff, carrying the chairs.
Right. He had that well sorted then,
He
obviously.
did, yes. Great character was Sam.
Ira Harford had similar beginnings to Ken Gore. Now, if you're an old pupil or member of staff, you'll probably be asking, Ira who? Well, before remarrying a few years ago, she was Mrs. Trotman, the domestic science teacher.
For 2 years I used to teach in the council school on the hill coming up into Wootton Bassett. I had a room there with 6 tables and I could take 12 girls. It's very ancient room and very chipped enamel things, a stone sink and a wooden draining board. Rather unhygienic really, but it was quite nice because I could keep control of 12 girls very easily. And then in 1958 the secondary modern was built, and I had an interview and came up here as head of the home economics department.
Now, we're right next to the block which actually contained the domestic science room, which is where you were based. Was that actually here then, or was that built on afterwards?
They first of all built one cookery room, and that was opened in 58, and then by 62 they started building another one. That was when the school began to grow. We started with about 250 pupils and gradually increased. We had a number from Purton, which eventually they had their own secondary modern built, and children from Lydiard Millicent used to come out as well.
And of course, like me, from Lynham.
From Hook and Brinkworth.
So it had quite a big catchment area, really,
We
didn't
had
it,
a very
school?
large
Yes.
area, yes.
My original staff came from several of the schools that contributed children, that is from Lynham, and from the 2 schools in Wootton Bassett. And some of the staff volunteered to risk coming and seeing what sort of bloke I was going to be, and said yes, they'd come and teach in the school. And they were excellent teachers. I was extremely lucky with that. We did appoint certain extra people, of course, from other areas, but none of them was any better than the people I inherited from the locality. I will say that I didn't inherit a single bad teacher from the Wootton Bassett schools.
The opening of the school in 1958 marked a big change in education. Until then, if you were brainy enough to pass your 11 plus examination, you'd go on to a grammar school. In our case, this would have been Calm Bentley as it was then known. If you didn't, then it was work, if you could get it. But the coming of the secondary moderns gave people like me an opportunity for further education of a lesser intensity. It didn't do us any harm. In fact, the first Wootton Bassett head boy, Desmond Casey, went on to become a wing commander in the RAF. But what of the early pupils? Tony Glasgow was the second ever head boy.
It was a very new experience for certainly for me, coming up from the small primary school at Wootton Bassett up to a big new school that thoroughly enjoyed it all. And Mr. King, he had this awesome thing about him. He was a wonderful man, actually, a superb teacher, loved English language, loved the Daily Telegraph and hated the Daily Mirror. They were his pet hates. However, I did have an incident where a pupil was just verbally abusing the head girl. And I went to pull him, and as I sort of said, "Hey, you don't talk to the head girl like that," I saw Mr. King's nose and glasses appear from the admin thing. And with that, Mr. King said to me, "Glasgow, he says, bring that boy to my office." "Yes, sir." Took him down there and he said, "Don't go away," he said, "my staff are busy, I want you to witness this, get over that desk, boy." And he gave him 6 very short, swishy pain on the backside. That hurt, yes.
Maybe that's a good example of what helped that first headmaster to keep his rather ominous nickname of Killer King.
Various boys, young men, men now, come to me and say, "Do you remember when you caned me?" And I say, "No, I can't remember that." I think some of them make it up. I said to one of them several months ago, "What you ought to do is to inaugurate a club called the Killer Club. And in order to belong to it, you must prove that you've been caned by me when I was headmaster at that school." But I said, "I don't think you'll get many members, really, you know." And I said, "You know where you can find evidence of this?" And he said, "Where, sir?" I said, "Well, I kept a punishment book at that school. It was the rule and regulation that if you punished anyone, it had to be recorded, and you had to have a witness who also signed the book. And so it was down on the date, the name, the crime, and the witness. It was nearly always the senior master." And I said, "That book, it was in the school when I left. Where it is now, I don't know." I said, "Perhaps they've burnt it to get rid of it." But I said, I should have thought it was a relic of the good old days.
Secondary education was already changing by the late 1960s, and when Frank King retired in 1967, he was succeeded by Donald Shepherd, whose job it was to bring about a major new era for the school.
I came here to reorganise it as a comprehensive school. And therefore, right from the start, I was envisaging the changes that had to be made and to bring them in as gently as possible. And the first thing seemed to be to build up a good morale and pupil loyalty to the school and make it as active as I possibly could do and have as many things that people with different talents could share together. And that seemed to be the basis of a good comprehensive school. After which, of course, people had different aims and ambitions for their careers, and that you had to shape curriculums to suit those.
But with that change, which happened after I left, there came more problems. Although there were more buildings added, some less than adequate compromises had to be made. Don Shepherd again.
In 72 we were up to about 1,100 or so, and then when I left in 86 we had 1,600.
What kind of buildings went up then? There was a science block, wasn't
We
there?
had a science block, and we had a sixth form block. We had plans for a new English resources and drama block, but at that time public spending was taboo, and so they gave us 15 wooden huts instead, which was a great shame and shattered a lot of our hopes, which they're now going to get rid of about 24 years later.
After years of battling, Wootton Bassett School in the 21st century was about to meet its biggest change. The whole place was to move next door, to a large brand new building. If Donald Shepherd had any concerns or dislikes over the accommodation during his time, then these were certainly echoed by Hilton Thomas, his successor, who took over in 1986 when Donald retired. He also took on board his predecessor's battle to make improvements.
The only area of dissatisfaction during my time as a head teacher at Wootton Bassett School was the accommodation. It was pretty awful for a school which, as you say, was most of the time was the largest, or certainly one of the largest schools year on year throughout in Wiltshire, with pretty good results, with a pretty positive image in the community. It was a pretty awful place in the accommodation terms. We had over 20 mobile classrooms, temporary classrooms, which had been there for nearly 30 years, some of them. And of course, when you get temporary classrooms, you also got temporary walkways and paths. Now, paths which are temporary are laid on a pretty thin foundation, and given a bit of wet weather, these paths start to sink. And so you get the mud running onto the paths, the mud being carried around the school, the children having to go out. Every lesson meant you left a classroom to go outside. So it's pretty awful. And we tried everything, myself and the governors, we tried all sorts of ways to try and get new buildings, get a new school, or to get some new buildings. We were getting absolutely nowhere at all. We considered all sorts of things in the 90s, GM, looking to the LEA. We were promised at least twice a rebuild, or a partial rebuild at the very least. And then suddenly in 1997, the idea was put to us that maybe PFI might be a way through. And I must admit to a great deal of cynicism when the idea was put forward, which became increasingly surprised at the fact that it was being realised. And then last year, when we were almost at the point of opening a new school, the building was underway, I had to think, should I retire or not? And I think it was the right thing for me to go then, so that my successor could take over a new building and take it to school on.
Which is exactly what Frank King did in 1967, when the subject of comprehensive education reared its head. When he first saw that gleaming new building, I doubt he even gave its future size a second thought. He had more imminent and pressing things to think about. Its official opening, for example.
I had one of the officials come up from County Hall, and she said, the official opening day of the school will be on May the 20-something, the first fortnight or 3 weeks of the summer term. And the Minister of Education will open the school officially. That was our local MP, who was David Eccles. So I said, oh dear, I was have to put on my best suit, and I better wear my gown, hadn't I? She said, we expect a certain amount of entertainment. Usually, on these occasions, there is a choir that sings and entertains for 10 minutes or so. But I said I hadn't a music teacher. I hadn't been given a music teacher. We were still trying to get one. So she said, well, something will have to be done like that, and left me with this problem. I had 1 or 2 sleepless nights about that, and then I found about a couple of dozen music books had been sent to me, amongst other books, from one of the schools that sent their children to the school. And I looked through these, and I found two songs which I knew, and I thought, now if only I can get somebody to hit the tune out on a piano, I think I could teach them this. And one was Greensleeves, and another one was Now is the Month of Maying, which was a sort of old Henry VIII type of song. Oh, I thought, well, that should be just right. Now is the month of Maying, but then I'd got to get the choir. I had one lady on the staff who could pick out a tune with her right hand, but her left hand was useless. So I assembled nearly all the girls in the top of the school, and 1 or 2 boys volunteered to have a go. So I assembled them in the hall one dinner time and got them to sing. I think we sang a hymn, and in that way we got this choir together. as I said, 90%, 95% were girls. And they could sing. And then we appointed a music master who came on the very first day of the summer term. And I said to this chap, they're all yours all day long if you want them. I'll take the rest of the school, the classes you're supposed to be taking, but you must get this choir ready. And he worked on that lot, and he taught them another song as well. And they put on a most wonderful show on the official day.
Silent, why sit we musing, you sweet delight refusing?
That music teacher was Graham Francis. Joe Gardner arrived in 1962. He was my history teacher and remained at Wootton Bassett until his semi-retirement in the late 1990s. He still keeps an involvement there, but his coming to the school wasn't exactly straightforward.
In those days, of course, you didn't apply for a specific position, for example, to teach history or to teach English or science. You turned up to teach what they call general subjects. And what you did was you would go in for the interview and you would put on the line what you were prepared to teach. So my strengths, at least I thought they were English, history and PE, but said things like I would do religious education, I would do some geography, I would do a bit of girls' PE, anything to help out and be accommodating. Thought the interview went quite well, actually. Got on very well with Frank King. When all the interviews had been conducted, the candidates were called in one by one, and I was last in. The other 5 were appointed, and I thought, well, I still must be in with a good chance. Sat down in the chair, and the chairman of the governors said to me, I'm very sorry, Mr. Gardner, but we can't appoint you, because what we really wanted was someone to teach science. And so, very disappointed, because I now had no job, I made my way back to Hailsham and thought, well, I've got to start looking for other jobs. I was in the process of doing that when one gorgeous June afternoon out on the sports field, I looked up to see the telegram man coming. And as he cycled across the field, it was fairly obvious he was making a beeline for me. And it was a telegram from Frank King to say, we've been able to juggle some things on the timetable. Would you reconsider if we offered you a job? And so the person who shouldn't have come to Wootton Bassett arrived. And I've now stayed 39 years and I'm in my 40th year.
Joe's semi-retirement lost him the title of most durable member of staff. Although he's worked with all 4 headmasters to date, that actual title went to my former house tutor, Pete Shepherd. Since 1980, he's been the school's deputy head.
I am the only teacher who's been here full-time since Mr. King. I did 1 year with Killer King.
Yeah.
And then 19 years with Donald Shepherd, 15 years with Hilton Thomas, and I'm just starting a new career with Chris Montacute. Yes, when I first arrived in the school, the whole school used to meet in the assembly hall, and there were about 220 pupils up to the end of halfway through year 10, or 4th year as we called them, and then apart from one group that stayed on into the 5th year, a small group of about 20 students, everyone else left by the end of their year 10. Used to finish school at 3:10, and quite a pleasant, a little secondary modern, but of course Mr. Shepherd arrived in 1968, immediately put an extra 40 minutes on the school day, and we're into a new world.
This is my lucky day, I've got a feeling running high that something quite stupendous now is on its way. This is my day of days, my
Everybody who was in the school or the area at the time will remember the pantomimes of Donald Shepherd. I don't think anybody will ever forget them. For anybody who's not sure, we used to put on 9 or 10 performances. It used to start on Thursday, Friday, Saturday matinee, Saturday evening performance. The next Monday, Tuesday, Donald was very kind to us on Wednesday. We didn't have to do a performance. And then the Thursday, Friday, Saturday. Now you can imagine that this was very tiring on the children, the parents, the staff. And we'd been through, or virtually through, this whole sequence when on the Friday before the last performance on the Saturday, there was such a demand for tickets that Donald persuaded us to do one more performance. And so we went into the Monday of the following week. Now you can imagine by now people were asleep or dead on their feet. I don't know how you describe it. And my job, the job that I took on, was that I did house management. So I was at the door seeing people in, seeing people out. And I'd spotted something as the nights had gone on, that one lady had not missed a performance. And every time she came out, I said, "You came last night, didn't you? Did you enjoy that? Oh, I'm coming tomorrow. See you tomorrow." And on the last Monday, she came out and I said, "Well, that really is it for this year." She said, "Yes, really enjoyed those performances," she said. "But what am I going to do tomorrow night?"
Right, you ready? Bones. Oh, I nearly got you that time. Bones. Which would you prefer? The money or the bones? Bones. Please yourself.
Well, what I was trying to do was to get a number of projects and activities that the whole school could cooperate in. In fact, we got to the stage where people felt guilty if they hadn't done something towards the pantomime, and houses felt bad if they hadn't sold many tickets. And so, the whole thing lifted the school, and it was something that all the kids had part in.
And I think locally it raised the profile of the school.
It did, and it raised a lot of money to help eke out the meagre ration we got from the local authority. But I did see one poster as I came in yesterday. I don't know, perhaps it was Aladdin, and it said that the expensive seats were 35p.
Oh, well, that's a sign of the times, isn't it? My goodness.
What news have you of the caravans? A rich merchant's coming. You don't say.
When Don Shepherd came from Kingsdown School, he brought various members of staff with him, like Maureen and Graham Tanner, a husband and wife team responsible for PE and games, and electronics teacher Keith Souter with his drama teaching daughter, Kay.
What he really wanted was me to continue with the electronics exam, and the Kingsdown School had been topped at the year 3, and the head there said, "Well, you can still show them how to connect up batteries," and batteries don't want to do that. So Donald Shepherd offered me a chance going over there to do half-time electronics and half-time remedials, which I was quite used to doing. I started it there when he was there, you see.
But it was actually quite a unique sort of lesson,
definitely.
wasn't it?
Oh,
It
yes,
hadn't been done
absolutely.
before.
It actually got a credit rating in the CSE handbook in the end.
My enterprises prosper. And now to find out how many wealthy sea voyagers arriving in the port are worthy of robbing.
And Keith Souter and his electronics students were an all-important part of those memorable pantomimes.
We had an intercom system with the lighting people. You could say, "Get ready with the magenta, right, go." And it all went,
And it worked.
It was quite marvellous when it worked.
I do remember seeing a first night of one of the pantomimes though, where the snow actually went up instead of down.
Yes, that did happen. It was on the glass disc, apparently, if I remember rightly. And the motor went into reverse.
All of these memories of school life were brought together in October of 2001. With the new school taking shape next door, and with the sad demise of the original building, it was time to hold an exhibition of memorabilia and photographs collected since 1958. Held in the old school hall, it was the place to meet former pupils, such as Jim Bullock, for instance.
When my children came to this school, and when visiting for parents' evening with them, you could see the difference from the King regime, where everything was pristine, nothing on the walls, And then the shepherd, he came along, and things were allowed to go on the walls, and the place got used.
Wendy Raisey, who in those days was little Wendy Hurd.
The mobile classrooms went here. It was just the tower block, caretaker's cottage, and the cookery room, needlework room, art room, sort of behind the tower block. We had a sports hall. We'd never had showers, never been used to showers before. Couldn't believe the showers. And poor Miss Bland, who was our teacher then, she had to try and get us girls all through the showers, and none of us wanted showers. So we all had to be ordered in, as it were.
Goodness me, yeah. Were they happy days for you? It's coming now.
Yes, they were, yes. Yes, we had some good times, good teachers, good education.
And Mike Crouch, son of a building family from Purton.
The thing I remember more than anything, there was a sports teacher called Gareth Evans in the old days, and we had a game of softball, which he said was a pretty soft game basically, but I finished up colliding with him, and he finished up with concussion and was off work for about 5 days.
Hilton Thomas said to me, would I like to be involved? And I thought, yes, I would, because there were many things which I thought would be of interest to people in the exhibition, and I thought it would interest people in coming back and seeing their old school, whether they were parents or whether they were pupils. And I got a good team together, John Guttridge and Brian Fossey, and having worked in the school for 30 years together anyway before we retired, I knew that when we had something to do, I knew exactly what each of us would do because we'd been doing it before. Also of great interest to me was the number of people who actually contacted me and offered help and offered exhibits. From yours truly, Jerry Hughes, to all sorts of people. I would receive phone calls saying, I've got this little photograph from 1964, would you be interested in it? Yes, of course I would. I suppose for me the highlight was seeing literally hundreds of people. It's amazing that the number of people who came into the exhibition did not have necessarily a direct link with the school, but who had given the school a great deal and had been interested in the school.
Joe Gardner, who helped to organise an exhibition that attracted some of the parents of former pupils too. Bert Davey, for example, whose daughter Linda attended the school in the 70s and 80s, and Bert himself became involved with the PTA.
Yes, I was treasurer of the main school PTA in the late 70s and early 80s, and I was also chairman of the Dispenser House PTA committee. Yes, I spent quite a lot of time in the school, even though it wasn't on an academic front.
And you used to have to get involved with the treasury for the PTA, didn't you?
Oh, well, as treasurer of the PTA, I suppose really the big event of the year was the annual fete. And as you can imagine, there were stalls of all descriptions, all bringing in small amounts, which cumulatively at the end of the day raised over £1,000, even on those occasions, way back in those days.
Fundraising became a large part of the Wootton Bassett School year. Steve Lacey, who I remember from my time at the school, is an ex-pupil who remembers one such event very well. The infamous bed push.
That's right.
It? Tell us about that.
Well, originally, of course, we had problems procuring a bed, but we managed to get it from the old psychiatric hospital that was out at Rawton. Birdrop, that's it, which then became the NHS stores. And I had to, wasn't involved with it, but we decided that was needed to convert the wheels that were on there to be able to take the enormous strain of the bed push. So obviously Mr. Bastin was involved, being the metalwork teacher, and we had to weld on these wheels and actually have spares in case the bed broke down. Because of course you only had a limited amount of time that you could take a break for repairs in order to attempt the record. And I've just read actually that we achieved about 725 miles on that bed push.
Fantastic.
That was all going around this playground here area we can see here now in a continuous loop past the sixth form. And those of us who weren't involved in the push were doing things like making sure there was plenty of food and drink and waking the people up who were ready to do the next stint.
Steve Lacey's wife and sister-in-law also went to Wootton Bassett School. They were Sheila and Jenny Reid then, with many memories of their own.
I got into a fight with a boy and broke 2 fingers, and because I smacked the boy in the face, I actually had a caning from Mr. Shepherd, and he actually remembered when I saw him today.
Used to like to rough and tumble with the boys.
I did.
You, yeah.
Yes. Yes, and also getting 2 prizes from Speech Day was the best thing that I did for modern language and for home economics.
Were they your favourite subjects?
They were my favourites.
Childcare
And childcare. Yes, I got an A in childcare. I remember when I first came here, I was absolutely scared stiff because my school down Normarsh Road was very small, and when I came up here it was so massive and I was so scared, and Mr. Gardner was the one that helped us settle in.
Your sister is here
my
too,
sister,
Jenny
Jenny.
James. What are your memories of being here at the school?
It's a great school, I loved it.
Yeah.
Scared when I first started. It's like my sister said, Joe Gardner was the one who really settled us in.
Were there any teachers that frightened you?
Mr. Foss was alright. Yeah, he did frighten me, but I liked him.
Yes.
He was good.
Yes.
And no, it's just a great school, like most of the teachers. I didn't achieve very well, the honest truth.
I never thought I would witness an apology from an ex-pupil to her teacher more than 35 years later, but I did. The school has seen several dramatic things over the years, and on this particular occasion in the mid-60s, Wendy Rasey, née Hurd, caused a bit of a furore in cookery. Her victim was the former Mrs. Trotman.
I was never very good at cookery, and I remember making a cake, and our cookery teacher asked us to put the ovens on a low gas.
I couldn't remember who did it, but apparently she must have turned the gas on without igniting the oven.
But she didn't actually ask me to light it, so I did put on a low gas. And when she came into the classroom, she said, "I can smell gas, girls, I can smell gas."
I can smell gas? Where is it? Oh, this little girl said, "Oh, I think it's here." She opened the oven.
And it went bang. And I can only say she looked a bit like Corky the cat.
I lost my eyebrows. A bit of a shock. I can vaguely remember about it now, but I think it was quite traumatic at the time.
I wish I'd listened to her because my cookery is still not very good.
You had the same woodwork teacher as me, and that was Mr. Upton, who we used to call Guppy.
Guppy, yes, poor old Guppy. Right. I can remember a contretemps between a certain gentleman and we'll call him Guppy because you and I know him as Guppy, and it became to fisticuffs, and then a chisel was produced, and poor old Guppy was pinned against the wall.
Good grief.
He wasn't injured, but his jacket was pierced.
Don't you remember the days of the old school yard?
From the time you came here in 68 and then eventually your retirement in 86, had the way of teaching changed at all during that time?
Well, what I noticed was there was more team teaching. By that I mean that teachers cooperated more to take aspects of a topic and work together on a topic, and the kids liked that. And of course one of the greatest exponents of the team teaching was a lady called Esme Parrott, and she did eventually become the senior mistress, and she had a great input into team teaching, and there was a lot more of that. There was none of it in 1968, but that did develop, and there were some very good heads of departments who worked their teams really hard, and I always made sure that there was an hour on the timetable every week for departments to meet together, because the more teachers meet together, the more they work together, the more they cooperate, and that always shows on the kids' results. And it also means that a novice teacher has the advantage of learning from the experienced ones.
Donald Shepherd, remembering one of the great Wootton Bassett School characters, Esme Parrott, whose nickname was, of course, Polly, and she knew it. She was also one of Frank King's first members of staff, just like the first deputy headmaster, Leonard Brooks.
Father had a connection with Len Brooks at Lynham, and it's through that connection that I came to Wootton Bassett, really.
The likes of Basher Brooks, who would stroll along the corridor, and we could divert every time from a lesson to talking about France.
I was delighted when Leonard took on the job, because I got on extremely well with him, and we never had a cross word in all the years we were there. And I knew if I was out on some business at County Hall or something, I'd say, Leonard, I shan't be in after 10 o'clock tomorrow morning, so you're in charge. And I knew it was all right. There was never any trouble.
But continuity at Wootton Bassett School must have been helped along by the ever-present Pete Shepherd. Having been there since the early days, he must have been an important asset in linking all the subsequent heads. And Hilton Thomas, headmaster number 3, certainly agrees with that.
There was a culture in the school, which I think is still there. I think it always has been in the school. That the children are important, that it's the students and their learning which is important. And that quality and commitment to them is part and parcel of the culture. I think that's always been there. It's certainly, I would say it's still there back now in the early part of the 21st century. So you had a core of staff who knew what standards really were and what standards they could expect, both in terms of learning and behaviour and their commitment to the pupils. And once you've got that in a school, you can then bring in new people all the time. It's always a bit like a football manager, isn't it? You've got a core of solid players who can be relied upon to know what the standards are. You can bring in young players around them. And in a way, the school is a bit like that, or any organisation.
Of course, yeah.
And then you can bring in people who could challenge you. So you could bring in young teachers who could challenge, but in a way in which they had to make their arguments stand up.
So it made it a nice rounded school in a way.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
I think so.
But of course the school offered opportunities because it increased from a small secondary school of 200 to one of the largest comprehensive schools in the county, and with a whole range of new activities, comprehensive education coming in. So it was like going to 3 or 4 different schools and taking in all the experiences one after another. But no, Wootton Bassett to me is a very special school, and whenever parents are being shown around and students are being shown around the school to decide whether to come or not, I always stop and say, best school in the country. The question is not, is the school good enough for your son or daughter? Is your son or daughter good enough for Wootton Bassett School?
I'm sure Pete Shepherd's sentiments will be true of the new Wootton Bassett School. The task of moving from the old building was a gigantic one, but nonetheless exciting, not just for the staff and pupils, but for the man whose job it is to oversee everything and take the school forward from now on. Current head teacher, Chris Montacute.
It's obviously still early days and there's been a steep learning curve. It's a very different role for a head teacher. Now that I'm now dealing with builders, I'm dealing with architects, etc. So in that sense, I said a very steep learning curve. Time is marching on. We're due to move in February, and we've now got to the state of looking at the logistics of moving almost 1,500 school students and staff and 40-something years worth of equipment over into new buildings. So there's an interesting challenge. I've been in the teaching profession for 22 years.
And was that locally or?
Yeah, I've taught in a number of schools. I started teaching in Bristol before moving to Wiltshire in 1986. Taught at a couple of schools in West Wiltshire. Moved to Gloucestershire from there. Back to Wiltshire, to Braden Forest, and then obviously began here in September of this year.
Indeed, and I'm so far enjoying it, one would hope.
Yes, it's an excellent job.
Yeah.
Some lovely challenges.
But having builders to deal with is nothing new. Frank King had that same task way back in the early days.
Well, of course we had other buildings built onto it, and this was awful because the school had to go on as usual, but we were surrounded by cement mixers and scaffolding and bricklayers and roofers and so on, but the school still had to go on just the same. And how we managed it, I don't know, especially as much of it was done in the summer term when windows were open to let in a bit of fresh air.
So there was noise coming in as well?
Oh, there was noise coming in, but on the whole the builders cooperated pretty well, I think. They realised what we were up against.
How do you think the job has changed since the days when Frank King was head at this school? Considerably, I'm sure.
It's interesting. I was looking at the punishment books and things like this, and it just seems so different In terms of, I suppose, the relationship, the way that people view the head, and imagine the way the head views themselves. I think I see myself very much as still a teacher. That's why I came into the profession. I enjoy teaching. I enjoy the fact that my job now allows me to look very carefully at curriculum design and learning to make that as effective as we can, so that when youngsters do leave the school, they really have achieved their potential.
In the days of Frank King also, I mean, he was a big advocate of the cane, and he told me that he used to use it on average once a term. You can't do that now. A lot of restrictions, but what's your personal view about that?
I'm quite glad I can't, actually. I can't see how it would make any difference. I mean, I tend to talk to young people when they've made mistakes or they're in trouble, and I think what they want to see from me is not so much punishment. It's belief they can put it right.
Yeah, sure.
And understanding the error of their ways and wanting to put it right. And I think there's an awful lot with them that if you have a belief that they really can succeed, they will do their best that way. I'm not so sure that the old whacking them or whatever will have an awful lot of effect.
Now is the month of May, when merry lads are playing. Fa-la-la-la-la-la-la, fa-la-la-la-la-la-la. Now is the month of May, when merry lads are playing.
Nothing stays the same, they say. And the fact that Frank King's lovely building of the late 1950s is about to be no more meets with mixed reaction.
I did my service when finance was very difficult and very hard. And some of the things, and some of the premises we built up and some of the things we improved, we thought were magnificent. And knocking them down so soon, one can only say, must be in the interests of progress. I do know that a lot of the past students who've been around this weekend were very attached to the buildings and they're very sorry to see them go.
Yes.
But then, of course, it's not for the people who've been here, it's for the people who are here and for the people who are to come.
You always wish that something will go on forever.
Yeah.
But no, it doesn't, unfortunately. So it was inevitable that this was going to happen, that a new school would be built, and I hope it's as successful.
Looking around, I mean, obviously there's work needs to be done, and I mean, the English department in wooden huts and have been for a long time. But I think it's sad that a building only 50 years old is due for demolition. It's a shame. I think there's a lot of atmosphere with the old school that a lot of pupils associate with.
Well, it's very, very sad to think we're losing this school because we had wonderful times here. I know everything is changing. Domestic science has changed. It's non-existent now. I often think education goes round in a circle, and it's probably due to start that circle now.
I always thought when I left that I would still haunt the corridors of the old school. But of course the actual fact that it's not going to be here is something I can't quite grasp yet. Children will never say, meet you at the tower or see you by the island. And, when you've been there and it's been teaching the very, very much part of your life, it's a sort of, whatever people say, it's a 24-hour job. When you've lived in a place for 36 years and it's suddenly not there anymore, and if this becomes a housing estate or whatever it becomes, I can't really quite come to terms with that.
But enthusiastic about the future?
Enthusiastic about the future? Yeah, because schools are people organisations and we'll still be dealing with young people there and forming them in the same way we always have done. So, oh yes, of course, I'm looking forward, a bit like Janus, who looked backwards and forwards in Roman mythology. So yes, looking backwards with regret, but forward with enthusiasm.
It actually isn't a lot bigger. In floor space possibly, and it's quite difficult to calculate. We have so many temporary mobile classrooms, which I think have probably got a shelf life of a few years, and some have been here for 30 odd years. It's not massively bigger, but certainly the facilities that will be provided in there will be much, much better. To give you an example, in terms of music, we'll have a recording studio to enable them to actually move with technology, I suppose, in terms of teaching of music. We're looking at the moment about a fully networked ICT suite. I mean, my aim is that every classroom will have a computer in it. That might not be achievable in the first year or so, but that's the target. And I hope it will look fresh and new.
Yeah.
Certainly from inside, in terms of even the colour schemes, it looks modern. And I'm sure that the pupils will appreciate that.
I very much hope that I will be able to go along and support the new school, because I think what will happen there is that while we'll all have our happy memories of the old school, the school's got to go on. And the current students and the teachers and the new headmaster, Chris Montacute, will take the school forward. It will still be Wootton Bassett School. It won't be the school that a lot of us remember, but it will be a new school. It will build up its new traditions. And I'm confident that if it gets the same level of support that the old school had, that in 30 years' time, they won't ask Joe Gardner to do an exhibition, but perhaps somebody like me will take it on and say, this is what this school was about. And perhaps, if I live to be as old as Frank King, I may be invited along to see it, but not to produce it.
But the affection for Wootton Bassett School goes back to the very beginning, and Frank King's attitude towards his secondary modern pupils was a good grounding for this.
Because we were fairly small in numbers, we were only about, I think, 250, something like that, for the first 2 terms. This gave me an opportunity to meet the children, and I went and taught in the classroom most of the children concerned. And I thought, on the whole, we had some pretty good children there, and how 1 or 2 of them had missed the 11 plus, I don't know. They were given the opportunity to take the 11 plus again on my recommendation. After, well, they would have been 12 plus then, but they were given the chance if the head teacher thought that it was a bit of bad luck that they had missed. And there were, I think, 3. 1 girl and 2 boys that I offered this to, and I said, go and ask your father and mother about this. And not one of them wanted to leave. So they stayed on. And of course were 3 of the best children that we had in the school as far as lessons were concerned.
It was a lovely school to work in. It was a lovely atmosphere, lovely parents, pupils were wonderful. When you think of some of the pupils, 1 or 2 rogues, without mentioning any names.
As you get everywhere, yes.
Who will probably recognise themselves in that. But for the most part, the pupils are absolutely wonderful. I think one of the loveliest things are sentences in Ofsted report, and it cropped up twice, independently in 2 Ofsted reports, referred to the politeness and positive attitude of pupils, that they walked around the school with a purposeful air, they were polite to visitors, and they knew what was expected, and they had high demands themselves of their learning. And I think that was rather nice to read in the reports.
I can certainly echo those sentiments. My time at Wootton Bassett School was a very happy one, and this programme has certainly resurrected some very precious memories for me. I too feel sadness that the old building will no longer be with us, but I wish Chris Montacute, Pete Shepherd and the entire school the very best for the future. But I think the last word must be with Frank Killer King, who set the original scene and helped to make it what it is today.
I don't want to go back. I'm glad I went back when I did a few weeks ago when we had this get-together, which was quite an emotional time because so many people came to me and were obviously very pleased to see me. I didn't recognise most of them because I'd seen them when they were 15 or 16. They're now in their late 40s or 50s. Some of the ladies are even grandmothers. No, I don't ever want to walk up there again, I think, unless I'm invited to go for some official thing. But it'll have very sad memories for me because I shall remember it as it was when the sun was shining on that beautiful brown brick building, and there were probably 60 or 70 boys and girls charging around the sports field, which as far as I can see will now disappear behind the building of the new school. So no, I think I'll keep the memories in my head and still remember Wootton Bassett with great affection.